Hey folks, today I'm ranking my top 15 favorite Virtual Boy tunes. You could be excused for not knowing what the Virtual Boy is if you weren't around in the mid-90s. Heck, even if you were around, it came and went so fast. If you don't already know, the Virtual Boy was the so-called 3D system that Nintendo released in 1995, and it flopped harder than candidate Michael Bloomberg.
Big gay ice cream is the best.
It flopped so hard that it was discontinued after only 1 year, with a paltry 22 games released and less than 1 million units sold. One reason it didn't do well is that many people found it uncomfortable to play, and children 7 and under were expressly warned not to play at all since the system could damage their vision, not unlike a similar warning for Nintendo's later 3D system, the 3DS. Also, the only way to make the system affordable for consumers was to stick exclusively to red LEDs, meaning the only available in-game colors were black, red, cherry red, fire truck red, scarlet, blood, you get the idea. Playing the thing felt like staring into a stoplight, and the image was created by a pair of oscillating mirrors strobing two slightly different images into the player's field of view 50 times a second, so it's not surprising that players often reported getting headaches or even feeling sick. Nintendo even built in an automatic pause function, encouraging players to take a break every 15 minutes. It's not a very good sign when a company is saying, please buy this new console, but for God's sake, stop saying it! So wait, why am I talking about all this? Well, recently I found a way to actually play the Virtual Boy games, arguably the way they were meant to be played. See, I never had a Virtual Boy growing up. When it came out, I was skeptical about whether it would be worth asking my parents to buy one for me, and while that skepticism was well-founded, I always wondered what it would be like to experience the games in stereoscopic 3D. Well, I got my wish when I bought an Oculus Quest 2 as a Christmas gift to myself and found an emulator that replicates how the actual Virtual Boy hardware would have looked, except better. I could finally experience the games for the first time in a more comfortable and much more affordable way than playing them on the original hardware. I even went a little overboard by buying an original Virtual Boy controller and a special adapter made by a Virtual Boy fan that allows me to plug the controller directly into my Oculus headset. There are actually some legitimately good games for the system that have been totally lost to time. Sometimes I wish Nintendo had ported a few of them to the 3DS Virtual Console, since it could have replicated the 3D effects, but alas, the company barely acknowledges that the Virtual Boy ever existed. However, I went through the soundtrack of every single official Virtual Boy release, and it turns out that its library has some fun tunes. So with all that being said, I'm going to show you my picks for the top 15 best music tracks from Virtual Boy games. I thought it would be fun to rank some Nintendo tunes that even video game music enthusiasts might not be familiar with. Before I jump in, here are the 2 rules I set for myself before making this list. Rule number 1, I can only include a maximum of 2 tracks from any one game. The truly great tunes in the Virtual Boy library center around a very small number of its games, but I wanted to showcase a wider variety of Virtual Boy titles. And rule number 2 is a rule, but it's also just a product of my personal taste when it comes to video game music. You see, sometimes a music track in a game is really effective at setting the tone it's going for, but it's not something you'd ever want to put on a playlist and listen to for your own enjoyment. The tracks I picked are all either bops, bangers, or otherwise songs I enjoy listening to over and over. And with that, let's get into it.
Number 15.
Music B from V Tetris. Our first stop is in one of the Virtual Boy's 2 Tetris games, this one simply called V Tetris, the other one being the poorly aging 3D Tetris. V Tetris is a pretty straightforward Tetris experience, and while it has a bit more personality in its art style than the Game Boy and NES versions of Tetris, it maintains the same gameplay that allowed them to become huge hits, while adding an interesting new mode where all your shapes made of 4-colored blocks fall into a cylindrical playing field that can be rotated as you play. This would be seen in later titles like Pokemon Puzzle League, but the difference here is it uses the 3D effect of the Virtual Boy, kinda. And just like its Game Boy and NES siblings, V Tetris also gives the player the ability to select their preferred background music from a list of themes. This one, simply called Music B, has a catchy bubblegum pop hook, and I can imagine it being used as an ending credits theme for nearly any game from the 8-bit era. Let's take it in.
Number 14.
Main theme from Golf. Next, we come to a tune from Virtual Boy's golf game, simply entitled Golf. It's a competent golf sim incorporating wireframes to give the player a feel for the topography of any given course, though, just like some other games on this list, the Virtual Boy's red color scheme feels all wrong for a sport associated with so much of the color green. This is basically what a round of golf would look like to the Terminator.
My mission is to get a birdie.
But the main theme that accompanies the gameplay here creates a nice, relaxing vibe. When I close my eyes, it feels like some kind of NES mid-game montage or an ending credits scene with a contented person on a boat. Why? I have no idea. But I can say that it's simultaneously jaunty and chill, and while its melody isn't the catchiest on this list, its comparatively long loop washes over you with multiple distinct sections of musical material. And here it is.
Number 13.
Main theme from Waterworld. Unlucky number 13 goes to a tune from the equally unlucky Waterworld. Occasionally in video game history you can find a poetic symmetry between a major motion picture and the game based on it. Like, for instance, Disney's Aladdin, where both the game and the movie were critically acclaimed hits. Well, 1995 saw the release of a movie called Waterworld, which, while its failure has been somewhat exaggerated through the years, it was a huge disappointment to its producers and received mixed to negative reviews at the time. And just like the movie was a poorly reviewed disappointment, so was its Virtual Boy adaptation. Its repetitive arcade-style gameplay added up to an experience that came nowhere near justifying its retail price of $39.99, which, adjusted for inflation in today's money, would be like, like $67,000 or something. But despite the slightness of the game, it had one thing going for it, a main theme that was simultaneously soothing and melancholic. It's reminiscent of the beloved track Aquatic Ambiance from Donkey Kong Country, both in its overall feel and its instrumentation. And with the visuals being made up of red floating things against an endless black ocean and sky, the music contributed to a singularly eerie and otherworldly feel. Composer Dean Evans was no stranger to movie tie-in games, having composed for titles based on Jurassic Park, The Flintstones, Lethal Weapon, Terminator 2, and Cavern Bacon. Let's take a listen to what he came up with for Waterworld.
Number 12.
Safety warning theme from Virtual League Baseball. This next pick is wild for a number of reasons. It was composed for Virtual League Baseball, but don't let that weird chibi guy on the title screen fool you. This is a game about tough, athletic, adult humanoids playing America's so-called favorite pastime. One prominent theme in the game sounds like old-school mid-century rock and roll, so it's weird that what I would consider to be the best song from this soundtrack is a cute little music box ballad that would sound much more at home in Earthbound or the Super Nintendo port of SimCity. This track absolutely sticks out among the rest of the soundtrack, and it's not a feel you expect to hear in this kind of game. Yet another super unusual thing about the tune is that it accompanies the Virtual Boy safety warning you see before the game even begins. Nearly every Virtual Boy game reminds you to read the instruction and precaution booklets before operating, just in case you played too much
And this is the result.
and decided to sue Nintendo.
We, the jury, find for the plaintiff.
But unlike the boilerplate safety warnings on, for instance, the Wii, individual Virtual Boy game developers made their own unique choices when it came to the audio during this warning. Some games showed the warning with no audio whatsoever, others had a little jingle or sound effect, but Virtual League Baseball had a full loop of music that, as far as I can tell, appears nowhere else in the game. The player can skip this screen almost immediately after it shows, so the number of people who have actually heard this little ditty in its entirety is probably pretty small. I first heard it on a YouTube gameplay video of Virtual League Baseball where it was cut off after only a few seconds, but I had a hunch there was more to it than that, so I fired up my Virtual Boy emulator and just left it on the safety warning screen instead of skipping past it. Turns out my instincts were right. This instrumental theme takes the listener on a little musical journey with an unexpected key change leading to another unexpected key change back to the beginning of the loop. It's a really pretty little tune, but also, folks, it's in an otherwise butchy grown-up sports game, and especially for the time, that is quite weird. Then again, it was made in Japan, so... In any case, it's a lovely little melody, and now I'm gonna shush so you can properly listen to it.
Number 11.
Main theme from Virtual Fishing. Virtual Fishing was only released in Japan, but Virtual Boy cartridges are region-free, so if you have a Virtual Boy, you could still play the original if you really wanted to. It's a fairly straightforward fishing game, and I was lucky enough to find a ROM translated into English that was apparently created by someone who goes by the name Thunderstruck on the Planet Virtual Boy forums. Shout out to Thunderstruck. While the game is nothing mind-blowing, the theme that plays while you wait for a fish to start tugging on your line is an infectious little tropical-inspired tune that feels like a cousin of the shop theme from Ocarina of Time, or something that could have fit right into the NES version of Joe and Mac. It was composed by Takashi Kumigawa, who also composed for Virtual Boy title SD Gundam Dimension War, as well as games for other consoles including Super Punch-Out and Star Tropics 2. The music here isn't intense, it's not complicated, it's just pretty chill.
Number 10.
Cosmic from Galactic Pinball. I wasn't expecting much from Galactic Pinball when I tried it out, but the 3D effects really do add a lot to the game's pinball action, and unlike the 2D images you're seeing here, when you play it in 3D you really do feel like you're looking out onto a long outer space pinball table. Instead of actual pinball, there's sort of a floating puck, but I guess calling it Galactic Pinpuck would have been a bit of a hard sell.
You can go puck yourself in space.
I was surprised to find out you can unlock a mode where you play a Galaga-style minigame as Samus from Metroid, complete with music from Metroid itself. Galactic Pinball's soundtrack was composed by Kenji Yamamoto and Masaru Tajima, though I couldn't find any information about which of the two composed this track. It's the music that plays in a level called Cosmic, and it's got a nice variety of feels for a short, chippy loop, beginning with a moody intro evocative of the vastness of space, and then going to a catchier section where the bass actually carries the melody. And then it wraps up with a more traditional melody in the treble range that feels like fun and tension ramping up. Let's take it from the top.
Number 9.
Level 2 from Virtual Boy Wario Land. And now we come to a tune from what is widely considered to be the best game on the Virtual Boy, the forgotten entry in the Wario Land series, and by forgotten I mean they literally called the third Wario Land game Wario Land 2. This one is simply called Virtual Boy Wario Land, and while it's not the strongest title in the Wario Land series, it's a pretty fun side-scroller with puzzle platformer elements. The game has a ton of personality despite being relatively short, and since the processing power of the Virtual Boy was quite a few steps up from the Game Boy, the animations and visuals come off like a Game Boy Wario game on steroids, albeit blood-red migraine-inducing steroids. The music was written by legendary Nintendo composer Kazumi Totaka, who also composed the soundtracks of Super Mario Land 2, Mario Paint, Link's Awakening, Animal Crossing, Luigi's Mansion, Wii Sports, and dozens of other games, so his pedigree is top-notch. In fact, the Virtual Boy Wario Land soundtrack is far from Totaka's best, and yet it still scored 2 entries on this list. Just like many flagship Mario games, Virtual Boy Wario Land has one main motif that gets reworked in different styles throughout the game, but I'd say this track comprises the fullest expression of it.
Number 8.
Levels 1 through 5 from Mario Clash. When a new Nintendo console comes out, Nintendo fans want to know when they'll get to see the new entry in the flagship Mario series. Well, here we only virtually got a flagship Mario title. Get it? And they called it Mario Clash. Mario Clash is a strange and challenging descendant of Nintendo's 1983 arcade hit Mario Brothers, which introduced Mario and Luigi a few years before they would go on to star in the industry-changing home console hit Super Mario Brothers. But Mario Clash's title doesn't have the word brothers in it since the game has no multiplayer of any kind, and indeed the Virtual Boy's planned multiplayer link cable was never even released. Here in Mario Clash, you play as Mario climbing a tower of 100 levels by clearing rooms of various enemies, some of them from the original arcade Mario Brothers game. Its mix of surprisingly difficult gameplay with a baffling control scheme hurt its reception with players and critics at the time, but its soundtrack, composed by Wario Land 4 composer Ryoji Yoshitomi, had a few decent tunes including the background music that plays during the game's early levels. Despite a slightly shrill arrangement, the tune waddles along with a charming melody and cutesy sound effect touches which, while they may confuse the player at first by sounding like part of the gameplay, they also add a cartoonish playfulness to the theme. Before I go any further, did you know I designed a Virtual Boy parody t-shirt? You can also get the same design on a mug, fanny pack, pint glass, and other stuff, so get it at this link or follow the link in the video description below. Anyway, now it's time for
Number 7.
Staff Roll from Virtual Boy Wario Land. Whether you get the good ending or the bad ending, this track plays during the Virtual Boy Wario Land staff roll, and it's a shame that this melody doesn't appear in any other form in the game. It could have been a much better title theme than the extremely aggressive title theme we got. But instead it was relegated to the very end of the game, where it bops along with a 1960s twist kind of vibe and just feels good.
Number 6.
Zack, as well as Ms. Flashy from Panic Bomber, which is just one of multiple contemporaneous ports of the game Bomberman Panic Bomber, but for some reason the word Bomberman was cut from the official title of the Virtual Boy version. It was composed by Jun Shikuma, who also wrote music for a staggering 19 Bomberman titles. Unlike the classic Bomberman game, what we have here is a puzzle game in the vein of Tetris Attack or Puyo Puyo, and it stars Bomberman in a rudimentary story campaign where Bomberman goes up against a cast of spooky characters in order to obtain a golden statue of himself. As the overarching goal of the entire game, it's a bit narcissistic, but anyway, the music I've picked here plays when you go up against a werewolf character called Zack, as well as when you face the recurring Bomberman series character, Ms. Flashy. It combines a cartoonishly spooky feel with a surf rock backbeat, adding up to a track that feels like it could be a chiptune cover of a song by the B-52s.
It was a panic bomber!
It's not very complicated melodically, but the groove is infectious and the intro gives it a strong start.
Number 5.
Title theme from Teleroboxer. The concept of Teleroboxer is basically, what if Punch-Out had humans controlling giant robot boxers instead of boxing each other? Kinda like the movie Real Steel. Its title comes from the term telerobotics, which is used to describe the human operation of semi-autonomous robots, like BattleBots and stuff. The confusing control scheme of Teleroboxer made for a steep learning curve, but the soundtrack is among the best in the Virtual Boy library. This short track is the game's title theme, and its funky feel and jazzy licks do a good job of evoking the game's sophistication, as well as its FU levels of difficulty.
Number 4.
Singles Mode 1 from Mario's Tennis. This tune was included in the soundtrack of the Virtual Boy's pack-in game, Mario's Tennis. That's right, the Mario Tennis franchise, which you might have assumed originated with the N64's Mario Tennis, actually started on the Virtual Boy with the similarly named Mario's Tennis. When I changed the color scheme from red to green on the emulator Virtual Boy Go, it has a decent look as a tennis game, but the stark red color scheme and pitch black background as presented on the original hardware create a uniquely purgatorial experience on the court. Still, the game has a fun, quirky feel, particularly in its character animations, and the presentation of the ball in stereoscopic 3D really mimics the feel of seeing a projectile coming towards you at a fast speed, even if it takes a bit of practice to master the timing of hitting the ball with your racket. This track was composed either by Hitoshi Fukushima or Morihito Iwamoto. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any information on which of the game's two composers actually came up with this one, but it plays in the first half of the game's singles mode, and for some reason, it brings to mind what you might hear if Nintendo had released a Game Boy port of Super Mario Kart, with its upbeat feel in this otherwise spooky red tennis realm. And here it is.
Number 3!
Forest of Fairies from Jack Brothers. This theme comes from what I consider to be far and away the strongest soundtrack in the Virtual Boy's stable of games, and it also has one of the most interesting histories since it's actually a spin-off of the Megami Tensei series, the same franchise that spawned the Persona games. In Jack Brothers, you play as one of the three so-called Jack Brothers, Jack Frost, Jack Lantern, and Jack Skelton, who have to escape the human world and get back to their own realm before the portal between the two closes. It's sort of a twin-stick shooter with puzzle elements that uses Virtual Boy's dual D-pad controller to great effect. And its soundtrack is so good it could justify its own top 10 tracks list. But in accordance with my rules, I can only pick 2 tracks per game, and this is my second favorite Jack Brothers theme. It was composed by Hiroyuki Yanada, who only has 4 other video game composing credits, and all but one are also in the Megami Tensei series. The music has an energy reminiscent of some of the more joyful up-tempo tracks from Capcom's NES titles like the Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers game and the Mega Man games. Its A section feels like zany, playful fun, and then its B section deepens into something a little more legato and thoughtful. Be careful not to get this one stuck in your head, it could really bounce around in there for a while.
Number 2!
Grim Reaper's Cavern, also from Jack Brothers. Yep, it's the second Jack Brothers tune in a row, and it is a banger and a half. The compact length of this theme's 55-second loop really takes you on a journey, with an A section evoking intense, quirky antics, and a B section that flirts with a richer and darker feel, while oscillating back and forth between major and minor keys, ultimately ending with a return to the verse's tonic chord in a way that feels inevitable, and yet somehow surprising, with the second half of the loop ending on a zippy little coda. It's absolutely my kind of video game tune, and I think it stands up to some of the best VGM tracks of its era. Anyway, let's listen. Before I show you my number one pick, there are a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. League Leaders from Nestor's Funky Bowling, Stage 2 from Red Alarm, Title Theme from Virtual Fishing, title theme from Bound High, which was unfortunately never released, so I figured it was fair to give it a nod in the honorable mentions. And Doubles Mode 1 from Mario's Tennis. And real quick, I just want to give a very warm shout out to my buddy Petros, who did most of the editing and visual effects for this video. He's not just an editor, he's a cinematographer, writer, director, and he makes how-to videos on the subject of filmmaking and videography. If you want to hire him for your project, or just check out his videos, go to his YouTube channel, Leon Unity, which is also linked in the video description below, and you can contact him in that channel's About section. Okay, here we go, kids. It's
Number 1!
Ikanger from Teleroboxer. Here it is, my number one pick out of all the tunes on Virtual Boy. I'm sure a lot of you would pick other tunes on my list over this one, and in fact my initial version of the list had it coming in second. But after I finished writing the rough draft of the script, I found that this was the tune I actually kept listening to more than any other. One thing I left out when talking about the other Teleroboxer track on this list is the fact that the music was composed by Katsuya Yamano, the then project manager of Nintendo's R&D 1 department, which is the group that created such legendary games as Metroid, Kid Icarus, Mario Paint, Super Mario Land, and most of the games in the Wario Land series. The composer here is especially multi-talented, as his positions on various games also included programmer, supervisor, producer, and project manager. To be able to do all that while also composing genuine toe tappers on the Virtual Boy sound chip goes to prove that Yamano is a game development renaissance man. This track is one that plenty of players never heard because they never got this far into the game, and it serves as the background music for a level where your boxing robot goes up against Ikanger, a 15-foot-tall robotic kangaroo who has a robotic Joey in his cybernetic marsupial pouch. Or, no, wait, her cybernetic marsupial pouch. Only female kangaroos have that, right? I don't know, I ain't no Brian Fellow.
I'm Brian Fellow!
Anyway, just take a listen. It's a funky bop, and it's my favorite music track of all the themes to grace the Virtual Boy. So, what'd you think of my list? What would your number one track be? Did I leave out one that you like? Let me know in the comments. Before you go, please give a little finger smooch to that like button in order to impress the mystical spirits of the algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed and hit the notification bell, please do. Also, don't forget, I'm selling this Virtual Boy-inspired design on shirts and all kinds of other products, which you can find by following the link in the video description below. And finally, if you're interested in playing Virtual Boy games on your Oculus VR headset, you can find instructions for how to do that, as well as some other goodies in the description below. All right. Whew. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.